We're getting ready to, at the end of the summer, we're going to begin a new series on questions. I've told you about this. And we've got about another week left where you can send in some questions. We've gotten some awesome questions, but we could use some more. And the more we get, the better sense we have of what things are really resonating with people, right? I mean, rather than just trying to pick questions, it's nice to know what's really on people's minds. So you can do that. You can write them on a card and give them to us. You can do it through our website. You can do it through our app. But we'd love just this week to wrap up collecting questions from you guys. So if you want to do that, you can. Today, however, we're beginning a new series in the book of Malachi, right? And or somebody on the patio told me the Italian prophet Malachi. So, Malachi is the last book in your Old Testament, and it contains God's message through a prophet to his people. And it was written, we're not sure exactly when, sometime in the 5th century BC, probably around 450 BC. And it's written to a group of people who really needed to hear from God. And it starts this way, verse 1 starts this way: a prophecy, the word of the Lord to Israel through Malachi. And as I said, these people were in need of hearing from God because these are people who have somewhat recently returned to Jerusalem. Decades before, they had been conquered, their city destroyed, and they were hauled off to exile or captivity in Babylon, which is in modern-day Iraq. And when Babylon got overthrown, a new ruler let them go back, after 70 years or so of captivity, let them go back to Jerusalem. And you can imagine that those were really good days. They go back to their city, they get to rebuild their walls, they rebuild their temple. One day they're rooting around looking for stuff and they find this book. Okay, it's probably a scroll, and they're like, "What's this? It's God's word. Let's do this." You know, they're all excited. But then they began to wonder if the good things they'd been promised by God were really going to happen. Because even though they had prophets like Nehemiah telling them how great it was going to be when God delivered them and when they were back in their homeland, those things didn't seem to be happening now. Their nation is still small. It's a backwater place. It doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. And the kinds of things that the prophets promised just hadn't happened. It seemed like God hasn't really shown up. And so they begin to doubt God. They doubt his love. They doubt his justice because their enemies still seem to be getting away with things. They don't have confidence in God, and so that leads them to losing their hope, especially in God. And so their worship, which they've just recently revived, their worship becomes listless, becomes purposeless. They're just meeting together to meet together. They don't take God's law seriously. They're ignoring the ritual observance that the law prescribes. They're not following the moral, the ethical components of the law. They're a people who are drifting. Things looked like they were going to be so great for them, but then it doesn't seem to have turned out that way. And so these are people who need to hear from God. And boy, will they hear from him. This opening phrase, it says, a prophecy. That's a declaration. And when it comes from a prophet, it's of the utmost importance. A lot of our translations use the word oracle. You heard Tim read that earlier. This is an oracle from God. That word oracle makes it sound supernatural, doesn't it? I mean, this isn't just an email, right? This is a message from God. Our older translations used a different word, the word burden. If you have the King James Bible, that's what it says, a burden. And there's a sense in which what these people are going to hear from God and what we're going to hear from God is a burden. It's heavy. It's weighty. It matters. And what comes with it is a sense of urgency, really almost a sense of dread because of this heavy thing that God has. God has some heavy things to say to his people. You know, the things that God has to say to us aren't always heavy, right? Sometimes they're less heavy or they're less burdensome, but not here. Not in this book. Not now. God has some very heavy, weighty things to say to them. And as we've mentioned, they needed this, and so do we. You know, maybe you can relate to them. Maybe you feel like them. Maybe your life, maybe your relationship, maybe the career path that you're on. It started out so well. It seemed that God was blessing you. He was opening all these doors, and the future looked great. But then, some time has gone by, and it hasn't really turned out the way that you thought or the way that you expected. And it's got you wondering about God, maybe doubting God, maybe wondering if God can or if he will hold up his end of the bargain, just like they were wondering. Maybe as a member of Rose Drive Friends Church, you felt disappointed. Maybe you look back to a time and you say, I remember good things. God was doing good things in me and through me. And the future looked so great, but then something happened. And something changed for me. And so it has you drifting, wondering. Maybe it's time for us to hear from God. And so what I'd like you to do this morning is try to imagine if you were going to hear from God right now, what would he say? What's the first thing God would say to us if he was going to speak to us? So just focus for a minute and try to pin down one thing, maybe one sentence, one phrase that God would say to you. What would be the first thing he would say? Well, when it comes to saying difficult things to people, wouldn't you agree with me that relationship matters, right? I mean, if your brother comes to you and says, listen, I've got some heavy things I need to tell you, that's one thing. But when the guy in the cubicle next to you just pops his head up and says, listen, we need to talk, you're a jerk, right? That's different. Relationship matters. And that's why I think as this message from Malachi comes to the people, the first thing God says to them has something to do with relationship. Because there's going to be some heavy things. And he's going to start with relationship. Did you notice how it starts that way? After saying this, the first thing that he says are these words that we've repeated and presented to you this morning, simply this: I have loved you. And that's a relationship phrase. That's all about relationship. I have loved you. Does that surprise you? I mean, does it surprise you that when God has some heavy things to say to his people, the very first thing he says is this? He declares his love for them. I have loved you. And that's what this is, a bold declaration. This isn't a whine. You know, this isn't, I have loved you. This is, I have loved you. It's big. Now, the Old Testament mentions lots of things that God loves. God loves righteousness. God loves the righteous. God loves the alien. God loves Mount Zion. God seems to really love these guys, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all these people are always talking about. But more than anything, if you read the Old Testament, the thing that God loves is Israel. God loves his people. Over and over and over again, the Bible trumpets that. God loves his people. And what we see here in this text is that this love God has for his people is continuous. Meaning, it's something that began a long time ago that continues now and into the future. See, when we read these words, I have loved you, we're tempted to think of it as past tense, right? I have loved you. Not so sure about now, right? But the Hebrew grammar that's behind our translation is in the perfect tense, which simply means something already begun or something happening in the past that continues today. So it would be perfectly legitimate to translate these words, I love you. A past action that has resulted in ongoing state of action. But these words, I have loved you, help carry the idea that this is something, God's love for his people, that began a long time ago. And it's still true today, and it's continuous. So what do you think it means to be loved by God? What does it mean to be loved by God? The older I get, the more I recognize that the ability to understand, to grasp and accept the love of God is the most important thing. It's the key thing in our relationship with God. So what does it mean that God loves you? What comes to mind? Well, God's love for Israel, for his people, is rooted in two things I want to talk to you about this morning. Two ideas. One is decision or choice. The other is permanence. Permanence. So this idea of choice and this idea of permanence. When God says he loves you, they carry those ideas. Let me show you what I mean. Deuteronomy 7 says this. You are a people holy to the Lord your God. You're special. You're set apart. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the peoples on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. The Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But it was because the Lord loved you. Do you see how God ties this idea of his love or his affection with his choice of you, picking you, right? So when God says, I have loved you, part of what it means is, I've chosen you. I choose you. Okay, the other idea is permanence. Jeremiah 31 says this, the Lord appeared to us in the past saying, I have loved you with an everlasting love, an ongoing love, a love that's different than the love you and I often are able to express, a love that's subject to whim, a love that comes and goes, a love that can stop, not God's love. It's everlasting. So when you hear these words, I have loved you, coming from God, think about that God's love is unchanging, but it also carries this idea of choice. And don't you love to be chosen? Right? Isn't being chosen one of the great things in life? You watch those shows like The Voice or American Idol, where the people are on stage singing for judges. And what happens when they get chosen to go to the next round, right? There's this euphoria. They're totally excited. It's good to be chosen. When I was in high school and in college, I was in a number of plays, like theater, right? And the thing I loved most about it was the process of being chosen. You know, you would go to an audition, you'd try out, and then there'd be a delay, and at some point they'd post a list of who made it in the play, and you'd gather around and you'd look, and if you found your name on the list, you were excited. I didn't care about being in the play or rehearsals and all that. I just liked being chosen. Right? Maybe you've had the blessing of somebody choosing you to bestow their affection on you, to be in relationship with you. Man, we love to be chosen. And the flip side of that is, don't you hate it when you're not chosen? You know, maybe you've been in the schoolyard when it was time to choose up sides and you didn't get chosen. Or when you stand to look at a list and your name's not on it. Or if you feel like you're alone because you have been left out of relationships. See, that's just the other side of the same coin, and it goes to demonstrate the power, the importance of being chosen. And so when God says, I have loved you, I want you to invest it with that idea, that thought, that he's chosen you. That's certainly what he wanted his people to think about, this idea of choosing and this idea of permanence. This is the love that helped his people all through their history relate to what it means for God to love them. And of course, there's a connection between them and us. God doesn't just love them, he loves us. Do you know that God loves you? That if you're in the sound of my voice today, it's true. These words apply to you. God loves you. And his love for you is this same kind of love. He's picked you. He prefers you. He chooses you. And his love is permanent. It's ongoing. Listen to the way that John put this in some of his letters, or in one of his letters. See what a great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us. In other words, it started with him. He doesn't love us in response to our love for him. He loved us. We love because he first loved us. This is the kind of love that the Scriptures trumpet for you and for me, that God loves you. And it's not based on how lovable you are. It's not based on whether or not you deserve it. It's not based on whether you clean up your act and you do certain religious things first. It's completely based on the fact that God has chosen, he has decided to love you. And so whatever else you hear today, hear God say, I have loved you. Let it hang like a banner over everything else you hear God say. And throughout this series in the book of Malachi, where God has some hard things to say, don't forget. Let it come underneath the banner that God loves you. He loves you. And so the very first thing God would say to you, if you were to hear him speak to you today, the first thing he would say to you is, I have loved you. And so how do you respond to that? How did they respond to it? That's what happens in the next part of this verse. This is how they respond to this declaration of God's love. But you ask, how have you loved us? How have you loved us? Did you see that? God says, I have loved you, and they say, have not, right? I mean, really? That's their response. Really? How? How have you loved us? As in, no, you haven't. And it's on. God and his people are about to have a dispute about his love. And this isn't a lover's quarrel. This is a bitter, spiteful dispute from the people of God to God, saying, you say you love us, but we don't think so. It's a dispute. That's pretty extreme. Actually, that's a literary device. This is a literary form called dispute. We're going to see it all through the book of Malachi, where God says something to his people, and his people dispute it. And they say, nah. Or sometimes the people say things to God, and God says, And it's put in this format of dispute. I don't know if that makes you uncomfortable, the idea of disputing with God. But you know what I like about dispute? It's honest. It's honest. If you had an honest conversation with God recently, maybe it's time. So God's people, when they hear God boldly declare his love for them, they respond with dispute and saying, not sure you do. And what was their problem? Well, their problem was similar to the way we've described it. Their current circumstances, what they were going through right then, made it hard for them to see past that and to see anything about God's love, right? We've talked about how they were captives in Babylon. They get released from captivity. The prophets are saying it's going to be so great. They show up back in their homeland. They rebuild everything. They're starting to worship God. And all of the promises made by the prophets, they seem poised to happen. But then a year goes by. And then 2. And then 10. And then 20. And then 50 years later, nothing happens. Nothing that fits their understanding or their description of what it would mean for God to be blessing them. Their nation wasn't glorified. They're still under Persian rule. In Malachi, we're going to find that their land was being ravaged by pestilence, by plagues. And so they lost their hope. They lost their confidence in God, and they began to doubt. They began to give up, because from their vantage point, they just couldn't see how God could say that he loved them. And so this is them saying, you say you've loved us, but what have you done for us lately? Right? And so although it's easy for us to say, what's your problem? How could you think that about God? The truth is we think the same thing. We often think the same thing. We dispute God's love for us. Maybe when you walked in here this morning and you saw this banner, your internal response was, I don't think so. Or really? How? Maybe you think God's love for you, you think of it as something in the past. He loved me, maybe. I'm not so sure about now. Maybe your circumstances are making it hard for you to really experience God's love. Maybe you think God does love people, but not you. And maybe you'd never say it out loud, but you think it. And your life shows it. Because after all, it's the way that we live, the way that we pursue God, where we show what we really think. And just like them, their worship became listless. Their pursuit of God became meaningless because they had given up on God's love. It can happen to us too. Once we dispute God's love, everything else begins to slip away. Everything else fades into the background. We find it hard to worship. Coming to worship just becomes something that we do. We begin to focus on things that don't matter. We argue and we complain or we're afraid. It's all because we've given up on the love of God. Because think about it. The way we sang about it this morning. If you were convinced that God loved you this way, how would you respond? We often dispute God's love for us, despite his declarations. And a lot of times it's based on our current circumstances. So what does God think about this? When we or when God's people dispute his love, how does he respond? That's what I want you to see. And I think the answer may surprise you. He says this, "Was not Esau Jacob's brother, declares the Lord? Yet I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated. And I have turned his hill country into a wasteland and left his inheritance to the desert jackals." Okay, that's a little bizarre. Jacob and Esau were brothers. So imagine you say to your husband, "Honey, do you love me?" And he says, "You know I love you. I hate your sister." That's what he's saying. Here's how you know I loved you. I hate Esau. I hate that guy. Now, that's a little troubling, right? I mean, the idea that God would hate somebody, that's a little troubling. And it gets worse. To explain it, I think I need to step back a little bit and just kind of remind us of the way the story worked. Remember Abraham? There was this guy named Abraham. And God chooses Abraham, says, "I'm going to make you the father of a great nation." And one of his sons is a guy named Isaac. And Isaac is going to be the son through whom the promise of God goes and a nation comes, right? Well, Isaac has twin sons. Esau, the firstborn, Jacob, the secondborn. And God is going to change Jacob's name to Esau, or to Israel. And Jacob becomes, through his 12 sons, he becomes the father of the clans, of the tribes that eventually become a nation, the nation of Israel. Esau goes on, and his descendants become the nation of Edom. So in Malachi, when God talks about hating Esau, He is talking about these two guys, Jacob and Esau, but it's also much bigger. He's talking about two nations. And so that makes it even more troubling, because isn't God supposed to love everyone? And here God's talking about, "You know I love you because I hate these other people." And we don't have a lot of time to talk about the idea of God hating people, other than to say it. There's a couple of things attached to it. One is, God, being just, is able and capable of hating in ways that you and I aren't, far more profound, and they're related usually to his justice. And the Old Testament, for instance, makes clear that Edom was an evil group of people. They hated God, they rejected God, and so they received judgment. Okay? But in the bigger sense, this idea of God even using the word hate has to do with contrast. A lot of times in the Bible, in the biblical language, they use the word hate and love as contrast. And so hate tends to mean love less, or love can mean love over. And it's not quite the same as the way we use it. Here's a New Testament example. Let's go. Oh, sorry. Here we go. This is Jesus. Remember this? This messes a lot of people up when they read Jesus saying this. If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. If you don't hate your father and mother, you can't be my disciple. Well, when Matthew records this speech, listen to how he records it. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And so that's an example of how the love-hate language in the Scriptures really is used in terms of contrast, where here Jesus is talking about, he's not saying to proactively hate your family in the way we think of that. He's saying, don't love anything more than me. Right? Love me the most. So sometimes when God says things like, I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated, he's referring to the fact that he chose Jacob over Esau, which is remarkable because Esau was the older child, the firstborn. But it's an act, it's an expression of God's love. Jacob or Israel, here's how you know that I love you. You could have ended up like Edom. You could have received the same judgment. You could have gone off and been godless, but you didn't because I chose you. And in an act of love, I made you my people. And things turned out differently for you. Not because you deserved it. Despite your shortcomings, I have chosen this for you. So God says, here's how you know that I love you. Despite your shortcomings, I chose you. And when you see what happens to this other nation, when they get what they deserve, you recognize that could have been you. It's undeniable that I've acted in love to you. And so that's what God says. I can prove my love for you by my actions, by what I've done for you throughout history. Look how differently things have turned out for you. And that shows that I have loved you. In other words, he would say to them, listen, it's not your current circumstances that matter or that tell the whole story of God's love. Of course they matter. But it's not the last year, it's not the last 5 years, it's not even the last 10 years that tell the whole story, that help you decide if God loves you. Instead, God says, go farther back into your history to the undeniable fact that you know I loved you because I chose you. And my love for you is permanent. And this gives you the capacity to now look at your current situations, even when they don't turn out the way that you want them to, differently. Instead of doubting my love, you can run to my love. God demonstrates his love for us by his actions. It's not a matter of words. He says, if you want to know how I love you, look what I have done for you. And in the New Testament, the ultimate act, the ultimate demonstration of God's love is the cross. It's the sending of Jesus Christ, God's Son, to die in order to purchase and make possible our redemption. Greater love, Jesus said, has no man than this, that he lays down his life for his friends. The book of Romans says it real succinctly. God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were sinners, Christ died for us. He didn't wait for you to love him first. He didn't wait for you to clean up your act. He didn't wait for you to show something that might be good in you. He didn't wait for you to show some potential. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And God says, that's how you know I love you. No matter what's happening in your life today, you can look back and you can say, it's undeniable that God loves me. We forget what an act of love sometimes the cross is. We get wrapped up in thinking God had to send Jesus to the cross. We think of it that way. Well, if God wanted us to have eternal life, he had to do that, so he did it. No, that's not true. He didn't have to. He chose to. And he did it because of his love for you. God demonstrates his love for his people by his actions. It's like that song that we sang that had that line in it about gazing on the affections, dwelling in the love of Christ. And it has that line in there about how my present afflictions are eclipsed by glory. And that's what he's talking about. When we look back at the glory of the cross, our current circumstances are eclipsed because we recognize the greatness of God's love for us. And it gives us a new way to see, a new way to perceive what we're experiencing today. God demonstrates his love. It's not this year. It's not 5 years. It's not 10 years that paint the whole story for you of God's love. It goes all the way back, even to the cross. All right, so what's our response to this? When God demonstrates his love, and we recognize it, what's the response? That's how our passage in Malachi ends. You will see it. Meaning, when you see the judgment that Edom gets that could have been yours, but it's not because I loved you, you will see it, this demonstration of my love, with your own eyes, and you will say, what? Great is the Lord. Even beyond the borders of Israel. This is not something that you keep to yourself. But the response of God's people to his love always is, great is the Lord. It's an acknowledgement. It's wonder. It's proclamation. And it's praise. And so they could look back and see how God had loved them. They could know there was more of it in the future. We can look back and know that God loved us. We point to the cross and we know going forward he's going to love us. And it drives us to our knees and it drives us to proclaim this idea that God loves us. I'm going to ask you to pray with me for a minute, and here's what I want you to do. I just want you to process for a moment where you are. Do you believe that God loves you? Has there been something you're holding on to where you're just not sure that his love applies to you? In these moments of prayer, would you let the truth that God loves you wash over you? If you're here today and you know that God loves you and you've accepted his love, would you take a step into that love today? And when we're done praying, I'm going to give you the opportunity to respond in the only right way. And that's to sing, Great is the Lord. Pray with me, will you? God, we confess that though you say you love us, we often can dispute it. And those disputes come from sometimes just the inability for us to see past our circumstances. Remind us anew that your love for us is so deep that it's demonstrated by the sending of Jesus Christ for us. You didn't have to, but you chose to. May every single one of us encounter that love today. God, some of us need to just confess that we've lost sight and ask you once again to flood us with the sure knowledge of your love. Others of us need to step into that for the very first time and reckon with the fact that there's a God who loves us. And all of us need to respond. And so we come to you and we acknowledge that we have seen it. You're great. Your love is great. We worship you. In Jesus' name, amen.